Oh, man. Good morning.
Hello.
Hi, Christina.
Hi, how are you?
Oh,
If I can start my video.
Oh, sure.
Oh, it doesn't look like it wants to do it. That's fine.
I am just realizing how much the red in around my eyes are coming through the.
It's okay.
It was a late evening. I couldn't peel my fingers off the keyboard. So.
Okay. Busy development time.
Yeah, we're. Well, I don't know how to concisely put it other than to say, yeah, we're pushing hard. There's a number of, it's kind of impressive. There's a number of people who are just interested in the same kind of common goals and have come to help contribute to this Meshery project. So it's very encouraging.
Okay.
I was able to get a couple of those folks that are excited about the project on this morning, and so that's both Girish and Prateek are both on.
Hey, Christina.
Hi, nice to meet you.
And then very good. And then Girish did say something. It didn't come through, so we might want to double check. Is your audio there?
It was a soft hello. I didn't want to interrupt.
Okay, hello.
Thanks for taking it easy on me. It is slightly early. Christina, this is great. I'm excited that we're talking. We were excited to stumble across your project, actually. Hopefully for obvious reasons, but I'm going to end up saying it anyway. And just before I do, I'll say that just the slightest bit of who's Lee and who's Prateek and who's Girish that I think will help give some general context. So for both Lee and Girish, our full-time roles are at a company called SolarWinds. SolarWinds makes performance, makes monitoring software, and much of that has to do with the performance and health of your infrastructure. The function that I lead is the most technologically forward-leaning focus of the company, and hence kind of our focus within the cloud-native space. This particular project, while hopefully ultimately interesting to SolarWinds and something that company can come to understand and support, benefit from, have other engineers learn from, this project currently isn't entirely separated from SolarWinds, but it is where we spend, eight of our waking hours, if you will. And so that's kind of that focus. We end up letting our inner geeks sort of lead the way and let our passions run loose. And so hence we end up doing a lot of things outside of SolarWinds, very busy outside of SolarWinds. And then for Prateek, so I'm physically based in Austin, and so is Prateek. Prateek is one of a few individuals, and the one who's really been the hardest working of these individuals from the University of Texas, Austin, from UT Austin. Prateek currently, is it live?
I'm currently a PhD student in computer architecture here at UT Austin.
Oh, okay. Who are you working with?
I'm working with Mohit Tiwari.
I see. Okay, very good.
Yeah, so the focus of my involvement with Meshery is to understand the service mesh and look into what kind of performance as well as systems research we can look into all these new technologies, how the cloud infrastructure should be developed, specific hardwares versus system development around the same.
Okay, are you looking at security implications as well? Because I know Mohit is doing a lot of security.
Yeah, security implications will definitely be a part of the whole agenda, but currently I'm trying to understand the lay of the ground initially.
Mm-hmm. And how far into the PhD you are?
I'm just completing my second year into the PhD.
Okay, very early. Okay.
Cool. Yeah, quite a bit to go. So while looking for these, like we started with AWS Lambdas and started looking to serverless and service meshes, and DeathStarBench was a good paper for us to start bridging the gap between the cloud and microservices, and then take it a step forward into the service mesh world.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we were discussing one of your papers, and we thought that, okay, let's see if we can pull in one of the, like a few of the applications that you have mentioned in the DeathStarBench, and see how it translates into a service mesh. What are these overlaying goals of SEER? And because SEER, as like DeathStarBench and SEER, they all propagate a common idea of having the tracing system, which traces RPCs to evaluate the performance, evaluate the benchmark bottleneck of infrastructure. And in service meshes, we have data plane proxies, which kind of already gives us a distributed tracing system.
Mm-hmm.
So we were looking at how to take it a step forward.
Okay. So when you say a service mesh, maybe I'm not very clear on the term. How is it different from a dependency graph of microservices?
So service meshes has different components. So like microservices is the control, the data plane of a service mesh. We have an underlying control plane of the whole thing, which takes care of the network interactions.
I see. Okay.
And a lot of these the service discovery, A to B, canary development, all of these are taken care by the control plane of the mesh, and
Mm-hmm.
the endpoint just takes care of the application. So
Okay.
it is kind of desegregating the control plane and the data plane development.
Mm-hmm. Okay, got it.
And so, Christina, actually, are you familiar with Mohit and some of his work, or?
Yeah, I know Mohit well.
Oh, nice. Okay. How did you guys get connected?
All the computer architecture conferences and program committees.
Oh, okay. I see. And now that we're actually, Prateek, now that you mentioned SEER as well, actually maybe I'll step back and say, Christina, what's the genesis and purpose for DeathStarBench?
Sure.
What's its status, and what's next for it?
Sure. So when I was a PhD student before at Stanford, I did a lot of work on cluster management, and that was all for applications that operate independently from each other. So you might have something like Hadoop, you might have something like a front-end web server, but there's no interaction between. And then when I moved to Cornell, I wanted to start looking at multi-tier applications, and by talking to people in industry, it's clear that people don't build single tier applications. They build multi-tier, even if it's not microservices, it's definitely multi-tier workloads. So resource management techniques that work for single tier applications don't necessarily work for multi-tier. And one problem we had was that there aren't a lot of open source, as I'm sure you know, there aren't a lot of open source applications built with microservices. There are things like SockShop, there's a hotel reservation, Go microservices, demo, but it's mostly small scale applications, not a lot of functionality. And we thought that it'd be a very good place to build a few representative applications, open source them, and then also from our perspective, use them to do cluster management work, work architectures for microservices, programming frameworks for microservices, and so on. So that's how that came about. The project started summer 2017, so it took about a year and a half to get everything done until the paper came out. And the benchmark suite includes a few applications. We haven't open sourced all of them yet, but we are planning to do that within the next month. So the benchmark suite includes the social network, which is already open source, a media service, which you can think of like similar to Netflix, so you can go and browse information about movies, review them, get recommendations about other movies, and so on. There is an e-commerce site which actually borrows some of the microservices of SockShop, but then it's more extended to have a search engine, a recommender engine, more databases, more information about different items. There is a hotel reservation application. And then there is also an application that is for IoT swarms. This is a project that I have on coordination control of drone swarms. So we also have this application that does image recognition, coordinated routing, and obstacle avoidance. So those are the applications in the project. In terms of what is open source at this moment is the social network application. Basically, the two main students that are working on this are in internships over the summer, so they can get a chance to open source the rest of them before leaving, but they'll be coming back in the end of August, so that's when we plan to open source the rest. And then with respect to the SEER project, the idea with SEER is that when you have dependencies between application tiers, if you get a quality of service violation, it takes you a long time to figure out what caused the quality of service violation. And if you take that long to find it, then it also takes a long time to recover from it. And furthermore, if you try to do that manually, it takes even longer. So the idea was, can we automate this process, use the large amount of traces that cloud systems collect, and we have tracing systems for each of these applications to basically recognize patterns that have a high probability of creating a QoS violation a little bit into the future. And then if you know that with some spare time, you can make a decision via the cluster manager, adjust the resources of whichever tier was going to become a problem, and then hopefully avoid the problem altogether. So that is the idea with SEER. We are expanding this in a few different ways. For example, in the ASPLOS paper, we assume that you have perfect tracing information. So you have something like Zipkin or Jigger or Dapper or any of the systems that breaks down the latency per microservice tier. But you might have systems where that kind of tracing system is not there, or you might have faulty traces, or you might have missing traces because of some error. So we're trying to see whether you can do the same analysis, but with less information. So that is one way that we're extending this. And then the other is looking more at resource management and cluster management for applications built as microservices.
Very good. By the way, you just said resource management and cluster management, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, very good. You said that word cluster a couple of times, and I was just tuning my ears to it. Fantastic. Both of the projects are exciting. As a matter of fact, I have to admit, not having spent a lot of time sifting through DeathStarBench, is SEER and DeathStarBench, are they being done in combination or completely? You're leveraging the DeathStarBench work?
Yeah. So for SEER, for the evaluation of SEER, we use the applications in DeathStarBench. We actually had a fairly large installation of the social network that we use internally at Cornell. So students use it as an internal social network. And then we collected a bunch of traces from that, and that's how we do the analysis.
Nice. Okay. Are students using it as, like, legitimately as a social network by which they interact and exchange and keep track of one another? Or are they using it really just under the context that it's a dummy app? Or
So they know that it's a research app and we collect the traces. So, I mean, we don't collect the traces about their activities, just performance traces. So I don't know how, I don't know that they use it to the same extent that they use Facebook and Twitter, but they do use it for interactions. They also use it to share information about courses and things like that.
Okay, got it. Okay. Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I love the idea of SEER. Well, Well, then very good. And then for you and your focus, your studies have been completed some time ago, or your research has been done, or well, I guess your initial research by which you now work and are employed full time at the university at Cornell. How much what do you envision it is that for your future?
Sorry, I can't hear you very well.
Yeah, Lee, your audio is kind of breaking off.
Is this about the same? Is it just choppy audio, or is it that I'm not loud?
It's choppy.
Yeah. Christina, I just wanted to understand the tracing system that you have developed as a part of Seer and DeathStarBench to collect the RPC and HTTP times and everything. The extent and like, can you give me some details about what the tracing system is all about?
Sure. So there are two types of tracing systems. For the Seer paper, we use something that's more low level and detailed because the analysis is based on the number of outstanding requests in the queues across the system stack. So for that, we had to instrument things like the NIC driver, the applications, and count how many requests you have outstanding. But each of the applications also is running with Jigger, which is similar to Zipkin, and that collects the application level latency per microservice ticket.
Okay,
and then from the client, you also get the end-to-end latency.
Yeah.
Just as you go to take notes, your keyboard is crippling.
Oh, okay.
But I didn't mean to necessarily interrupt. I just, I know it's distracted Christina a couple of times in it. So.
That's okay. Sorry, Lee, you were asking me something before and it cut off.
Boy, I was trying to, nope, I think you got I lost my train of thought, actually. I was so busy trying to figure out either my bandwidth issue or my, well, maybe to tell you a little bit about then the status of Meshery and you know, I suppose it's obvious now, but why it is that, yeah, the sample apps were of interest. Meshery aims to answer a few different questions that people have in and around what we really consider a third evolution of cloud native. For many people, like getting to distributed systems was really facilitated through the popularization of Docker. That kind of as a first wave of them coming into doing cloud native things, doing distributed systems. To the extent that they were doing it seriously, this second wave came around with a bunch of battles over container orchestrators. Now that that war has completed, there's one around proxies, and inherent to proxies are their use through service meshes. And really that is a fairly hot battleground. And having spent a lot of time within both of those first two waves, containers and container orchestrators, we're now seeing a lot of the same issues that are fairly common to any time that someone goes to adopt a new piece of technology and invest into it heavily, or have faith that that new technology will work and work as boring infrastructure. That's happening right now with service meshes. There's it takes the collective of the world's workloads a really, really, really long time to be modernized or to move forward. Many of the world's workloads will never, run inside of a container, much less on an orchestrator, much less on service mesh, or much less in functions or whatever is next. But there are many, there's a very, even the fact that it's a smaller percent of the world's workloads, there will still be an impressive amount that are running on top of service meshes, to the extent that we just assume that service meshes will be commonplace infrastructure within the next couple of years, that it would be kind of odd if you were doing a new project or if you were maintaining an existing project, that would be really kind of weird today if you're not running that inside of a container. There are exceptions and it makes sense that you wouldn't, but mostly you would sort of expect it. You'd kind of expect the same thing for running a container orchestrator. Soon, we would expect the same for service meshes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so it's based on that we understand that people have a hard time understanding what service meshes are, which one they should run, what the performance overhead is of running a mesh, and comparing that to the value that they're deriving from that infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
And so Meshery is intended to just do a few different things. One of those is like a public service of helping people, handing them a tool that they can more easily wield and run things, do things they can already do, like performance testing, but in a much easier way, and also to collect anonymous statistics and performance test results. Those are being collected through Meshery, and it's our intention then to share those back to the world, the public, and let them know, hey, here's here's how their infrastructure, their workloads are performing against others. Here's here's the overhead of different meshes as compared to one another.
Mm-hmm.
And then to ongoing help them manage the performance of their applications, both as new versions of that service mesh are released and new versions of their applications are released of each of their individual microservices, so that they can have an initial baseline and then can measure against that baseline over time.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
okay, that's interesting. So when you say measure, what kind of metrics do you collect?
it's both like probably the leading metric being that of throughput and latency of their user-facing endpoints. So the work, so maybe for like the Netflix, like the media service app that you were talking about, maybe it's the catalog interface. Maybe it's once someone is streaming video, maybe it's that interface. But it's also then that throughput and latency there, fantastic, interesting, but really needs to be understood in context of the infrastructure that's running it, the cluster that's running those services. And so it's also collecting node statistics, so metrics of CPU and memory, not focused so much on storage at the moment.
Mm-hmm. How about per microservice latencies?
Yeah, we haven't as of now, I don't think we collect it at a per microservice latency and throughput of those, but that is one of the future goals of the project, like looking at the application and collecting the whole, not just client-side responses, but each microservice latencies and throughput as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's great. The reason why I'm asking is because what we saw with Seer was we are collecting latencies and then utilization metrics, and they don't necessarily match. So you might have a microservice that has low utilization, but is the culprit for a QoS violation, and the other way around. You might have high resource utilization, but that's because it's waiting for something to respond. So it's not necessarily the problematic microservice, but it looks like it is.
Christina, so one thing, so to answer your question, now most of the sample apps we've been using, plus the source meshes, we've been using for our testing, they do have the capabilities for collecting traces. So the application themselves only support passing around the right headers, but the collection of traces themselves are actually performed by the sidecar and are actually shipped to a system like Jaeger. So,
Okay.
so now that's there, but then now from within Meshery, like up until today, we're not storing it. But I mean, now since we are actually deploying like meshes or helping people deploy meshes, in most cases, we do also support deploying them with the traces enabled. So as long as the Jaeger system has a persistence, that's going to be there. So that's also there. But eventually we'll be looking into kind of bringing that into Meshery as well and making it much more valuable to the end user. So yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, and so so we've gone around and gotten fairly vocal about Meshery, both to get some feedback on the project, garner additional interest, elicit collaborators and contributors from the general community, but also from Google, from Microsoft, from Buoyant, HashiCorp, AWS, and others that are running. There's a fair number of articles or posts that have been made about the performance of applications and the performance of services. They are inevitably, even if they not intellectual enough, or they didn't consider half of what they needed to, or they are inherently biased, and not necessarily intentionally, but they were either sponsored by one of the service meshes. And so we're hoping to, from an unbiased perspective, level set some of that. And so the part of the work that I do and Girish does is within the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. And so I'll be establishing shortly a new working group focused on networking, which covers service meshes, but also a few other things. And part of that, we're likely to push Meshery into the CNCF as a CNCF governed sandbox, or a CNCF governed project. And so as we go to do that, we are going to leverage some of the CNCF's resources. We'll get some time on one of their clusters to go and run an at-scale test across hopefully 5 different service meshes, and run a variety of combinations of tests. I would say that our test plan there is maybe half as thorough as I would like for it to be. So the thing that I wanted to do here is explain the project to you, its goals, see if they resonated, see if we were to go use the social app, if there was things that we were doing that could help advance your cause and your focus, things that would be helpful to either validating work that you've done or advancing the work that you're currently doing. And see if, like, one of the things that you just said was great about, hey, in some of our findings, it's not necessarily the service that's resource hog that's the cause of the issue. That's the issue is manifested there. It's actually a dependent service that's not responding quickly, and that's causing an issue to manifest elsewhere. And so it's like some of those findings and those insights, I thought we might be able to either collaborate on or share the insights that we're garnering. I don't know.
Yeah, so one of the main things that we're doing right now, like I was saying before, is cluster management, which sounds like is a lot of what the service mesh is supposed to do as well. And that's something that we do plan to open source once it's done. So I'm seeing something like that work in Meshery, or just trying it to see how it works with your system. That would be great. Another aspect is we haven't looked that much into how updating microservices or changing the implementation of microservices affects performance. So that would be another direction that would be interesting to us.
Yeah, we're hoping that part of what Meshery does is facilitates the, I guess it's kind of like I was saying before, folks can go grab WRK2 or another load generator and point it at endpoints and collect the metrics and kind of track them, and it just kind of gets to be a mess, and and it takes them longer to. Anyway, we're hoping that we bring some tooling that just facilitates much of that and the comparison of statistics. So within Meshery, actually, one thing, Christine, if it makes sense to do, I realize we're at the top of our 30 minutes, is maybe to give you a demo of the project, which would better illustrate what it is that I've been trying to verbally describe. May spark some ideas.
Sure. Sure.
So I guess let me ask, or let me say, I've got more time right now if you guys do, or if that's something that we're inclined to do right now.
So I have until 10:15. I have another meeting at 10:15, but I have about 10 minutes.
Okay. So between Prateek and Girish, either of the two of you guys want to bring up the app, or should I grab it?
I am not running the latest poll yet, so maybe Girish or yourself.
Girish, this is your chance to show off the stuff.
I can try to show, but Lee, your voice was really low in the last sentence you just said.
Do you want to show off the new Billboard JS stuff?
I'm going to show my whatever is working on the local.
Okay.
I'm not going to try to switch branches or something. But just a second. I had shut down the servers. Need a few minutes.
Okay. So while you're bringing it up, I'll grab it here. And so, Christina, the essence of the essence of the app right now is there's kind of two areas of functionality. One being an area that's a playground, and that's intended to help answer people's questions about coming to understand what a mesh is, how it works, what the differences between other meshes are. It facilitates deploying one mesh versus the next. So the interface that you're seeing here is this quick setup that people do. They come here and they set up their environment. They choose in this case, their cube config. They then they upload their cube config to the app, and their app right now is running locally on my desktop. And generally, when people are when they're using this app for purposes of performance testing, we probably expect that they're running the load generator outside of their cluster. It's valid, probably however they want to run it, but a lot of our documentation sort of expects that they're running it on their local machine. And so we're connected to this Kubernetes instance. We can go over and then connect up different service mesh adapters that have been written both by us and members of the community. And so, and then to the extent that your cluster has Grafana running, and that you'd like to point to Grafana and have Meshery pull in any of the dashboards that you've already created, and therefore not just the dashboards, but also the metrics that you've created, that Meshery will do that as well. So kind of to the point and the question you were asking about per microservice statistics, Meshery is capable of pulling those statistics. The caveat that Girish was giving earlier was we're working on the persistence of those metrics over a long period of time, because there's a little bit to do with aggregation and summarization and things. Also, it's an open source project, so we're trying to do everything free if possible. And so storing those statistics. But you can point it at an existing Grafana instance or an existing, a different Prometheus endpoints. But once you've done that, and in this case, I think I've connected a few different adapters that you can go over and tell Meshery to install. And in this case, it would be installing Grafana. I'm sorry, installing console. I don't even know if I connected the console. So in this case, sending over. Anyway, my point being is I'm sending over the command to install Istio. Once Istio is either up and running or not, I'll get either an error notification. So in this case, maybe since I just brought up a quick demo, I don't even know if I'm connected to the cluster that I'm supposed to be, but you send these commands, you'll be able to install apps like the social app potentially. And then once you've gotten that up, and by the way, you can send over just if you have a certain manifest or set of YAML that you'd like to send to your cluster, you can use this interface to do that. Once your infrastructure is there, maybe you've grabbed the endpoint that you'd like to generate load against and push load against. You come here and maybe give a name to your test, identify what type of mesh it is that you're running. Give it your HTTP endpoint. Currently, we're working on gRPC and TCP support as well. You know, tell it how much load you want to send, for how long, run the test. When you do, the test results will come in here and it'll show you the throughput and latency that I've described. It will also then show you down below the Grafana statistics or the metrics that you've also identified that you wanted to pull in. It will then persist those results so that you as a user can come back and look at those results historically and reference them in terms of what it was for that configuration at that time. If you want to maybe take two of those results and compare them, and so it'll overlay one result over the next so you can see the difference. And it'll do it over as many results as you'd like to do it. At some point, it probably becomes relatively confusing or intense as you look at that. I think maybe the last thing to say that it does is well, actually, I don't know. Girish, did I miss something? I feel like I missed an important point that, or didn't I?
I think you covered pretty much all the right ones.
Okay. Yeah. So I don't.
No, that's great. That's very useful to see what it does.
So you guys, how active is the project over the summer? Is it, are you waiting for the two students to come return in a month here?
I am, a bit less than a month, so it will be the next 3 weeks. So there's still we're still fixing a few things internally. We have a conference deadline in the next 2 weeks, so the next 2 weeks will be pretty busy. But after that, we can upload the rest of the applications. What I would say is, I don't know if you've gotten a chance to try the social network yet.
I haven't.
Okay, so what I would say is try that one yet, because the others, most of them are implemented in a similar way. One of them is using gRPC, the social network and media service are using Thrift, and then the e-commerce service is using HTTP. We just want to get some coverage of the different type of protocols that people use. But I would say give that one a try. See if you run into any issues. Feel free to let us know if you run into any issues. We are updating it constantly, so any bugs that we find, that's great. And then over the next 3 weeks, we'll share definitely the other two applications. I don't know about the drone one yet, but it doesn't sound like you need IoT style applications at this point, so I think that'll be fine.
Yeah, ultimately it'll be fantastic. For the most part, we're looking for whatever we can get, or hey, there's enough. There'll be enough buzz and interest just on that, and then there will be enough buzz and interest around the others as well. For you and this effort, what does success look like?
Sorry, what?
What does success look like? When are you?
For the benchmark suite is, getting as many people using it as possible. And then from an academic perspective, it's highlighting the system challenges of microservices. Because if you look at most computer architecture and systems conferences, people still use very simplistic applications, not even multi-tier, just very simple single-tier applications, which I think is leading to a lot of wrong conclusions in how systems are designed and architectures are designed. So pointing people to some of the new challenges these applications have would be great from my perspective.
Very good. We'll certainly do. So Prateek, I don't know if you have any last minute.
Yeah, like I'm good. Like I actually had a couple of questions, but I don't think regarding the paper regarding you mentioned that iCache pressure is noticeable not because of branch mesh prediction, but more because of fetch latencies in the small microservices. What are your thoughts about data caches? Like, because most of the microservices are designed these days to be stateless. Like, should there be a push for lower data caches in server architectures?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think when you're looking at the different cache levels, they're still small enough that even for a microservice, you will get some contention. It's less than what you would have in traditional monolithic applications, but you still get some contention. Same with iCaches. It's not that you don't get misses, it's that you get much fewer misses than you would get with a monolithic application, which had spawned this whole line of work on how do you fix iCaches for large data center applications.
But what about the reuse of data cache? Because most of the small microservices take the data, use it, and then send it back over a RPC request. So there isn't much data reuse. In memory cache should be a good 10 of, is my understanding, like what I'm looking at.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think there's a difference between microservices and serverless here. I think with serverless, you're absolutely right, because you use something once and then sometimes the container doesn't exist anymore, or definitely the function doesn't exist anymore. So probably you don't get a lot of reuse. Microservices are not necessarily short-lived. So depending on what the microservice is doing, you might still get some reuse. So if it's a cache, again, it depends what's the logic of the application. I would say for serverless, definitely caching probably does make a lot of sense.
Okay.
Very good. Christina, we'll try out the social app in Meshery. As a matter of fact, try to get it loaded up and cut a Meshery release that has it included. And I don't know, so within, maybe it sounds like you've got a conference deadline in a couple of weeks, but maybe a couple of weeks from now to circle back with you, show you the social media app, I'm sorry, the social app running on Meshery.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds great. So after the 15th, I am free. I have 2 weeks before the beginning of the semester, so that's a good time. But yeah, I mean, even in the meantime, if you run into issues, feel free to send us an email or put an issue on the GitHub repo, and then we'll get to it.
Oh, nice. Very good. Do you end up using Slack much?
We use it internally for a couple of projects. I prefer because then I don't have to check it every day.
Yeah, understood. Fair enough. Very good. Christina, very nice to meet you. I'll, another thing, do you end up using Google Docs much? We have a community. Okay. Maybe sure. Okay. Well, we'll send you an invite to.
All right. Sounds good. It was great meeting you all.
Yeah. All right. Very good. Talk to you soon, Christina.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye-bye. Prateek, I guess I didn't realize that she was familiar with, that you guys are familiar, so to speak, or, you know.
Yeah, like she's a professor at Cornell, so like we are working on similar academic circles. So yeah, I'm kind of familiar with her work and she with ours, like other projects of Mohit and different academic lines.
Nice. What's your sense and feeling of the conversations? Did it go as well as you would hope? And does it sound like she wants to collaborate beyond us just using her apps, or?
I'm not exactly sure, because she did seem to be pushing for us to try out the application, but not really collaborate with the instance running on their end, because that would be a huge instance that they would be running if they actually have it deployed with real people using it. So I'm not sure where that discussion was leading me. If we could plug in or play with the instance and like their instance and our Meshery project, then that would have been an ideal, but that did not seem to be the main talking point there. But I think if we do end up successfully deploying the social application and try to iron out all our kinks from the Meshery and the integration point of view, she might be open to deployment and data collection and things like that. I'm not sure at this point. Like, it did not seem that there seems to be a lot of contribution interests from her side.
Yeah, I think that I think you got it. You hit it on the head. I agree. I think I'm hopeful and somewhat confident that if we are consistent, that it'll be probably hard for her. It will be compelling enough to her that she probably won't ignore it. My hope would, my sense is that it may go like this, like, hey, if we're consistent, we're running the social app sometime within the next week. We provide her some feedback. Maybe it's just, hey, we got it running, great. Just kind of a touch point with her. After that, we say, hey, look, there's a new release of Meshery. It's got it in there, great. Oh, hey, a user gave feedback on it or had a question like this, like those types of things, like I'm assuming would pull at her. And then after that, we say, oh, you released the media app. Okay, we're running that as well. And then we start to say, look, we're beginning to collect, a few people are beginning to run this. We're beginning to collect some statistics over time. Maybe you're interested in those. Oh, but really what we need is for you to start running Meshery internally, and maybe you to not talk about DeathStarBench as much as you talk about, or that's fine, go ahead, but talk about, or not WRK2 rather, but talk about Meshery, and then, hey, there's a few different, they're not academic, but a few different other conferences that we're speaking at that, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I could see it unraveling in that path.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the thing that she talked about, I don't want to step on her. So for some of the research that Prateek is doing, that Mohit is doing, he's looking to monetize it. Awesome. Or, awesome either way. But knowing that he's looking to monetize it, I'm not saying, Mohit, hey, let's go work on all these security use cases and specifically exactly what you've been researching. Because that would be stepping all over his next focus, and I don't want to do that. I don't know if you've spoken with, and I know that you speak with Prateek, but I don't know if you spoke with him on this recently. He's been excited by the notion and suggesting that maybe he and or others I think as he enters into the world of cloud native startups and open source centric motions of doing that, he's going to come to realize the value of the currency that a project like Meshery is, and the value of the mind share that projects like this garner, and the fact that it's going to be mentioned in the only full-length book on Istio coming out in a couple of months. Layer 5 will be mentioned a bunch of times, so will Meshery. As a matter of fact, Meshery, you may see some of your work in print, Prateek.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, if it interests, I can send you an early example of some of the stuff that is highlighted in that book. But anyway, my point is that Prateek wants to augment Meshery with some security-centric things. Great. Those things are not going to take away from what he's monetizing. I'm only talking about Prateek or Mohit in this regard. One, we should talk about it, but two, I was bringing it up to say that I was trying to understand if Christina felt like we might go steal some of her potential future paths to monetization, which is not what we're looking to do. But if she's not going to monetize it either, then tell me this, from the world of academia, if you wrote a research paper, published it, it gathered a lot of interest, and someone went and began writing software that leveraged those ideas and those algorithms, and you're not going to do that. You're going to continue to do research and research and research and research. Is that a win to you, or is someone stealing your idea?
That's a win. That's a win in my opinion. Yeah. Because of course, whoever works on it is going to give due credit to our work, and since I'm not making a software out of the bare bones of the project, anyone who does it and gives credit, due credit to us, is a win.
Nice, cool. Well, then I really hope that Christina is not going to monetize what she's doing, because yeah, any number of times that's essentially nearly exactly what I've talked about for some things to come within Meshery. And it's that type of insight that is intriguing to people and very valuable to them. That's difficult for them to discern and figure out themselves. Because yeah, they will go look at the red herring of they'll go say, wow, that service is consuming 4 gigs of RAM. And that's just because it's sitting there, it's been spooling and waiting forever on something else, and they wouldn't know that. Anyway, there's a bunch of use cases like that. The auto-tuning of the mesh in general, that's something that would be fantastic that people would be very interested in, as long as you get it right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So actually, Prateek, I think I've asked you, after this year, what do you envision?
So I'm still currently working on these lines. Trying to see what kind of work Christina and other peers are doing, and trying to figure out a good novel approach towards it with service meshes in focus. So if we are able to deploy her tool chain that she has developed into Meshery, and we have larger deployments, then I think that we can get some data for me to go into a publication, academic publication as well. So that can include Christina as a co-author, and that should be a academically inclined win for her as well.
How many years in your PhD?
Sorry, you broke off.
How many years do you have left for your PhD?
I don't know, 3.
Okay. Okay, good. Well, so thanks for cutting out of your internship this morning. I don't know. I'm sure that thanks for cutting out of the internship this morning to come join.
Yeah.
I feel poorly that I haven't followed up since our last discussion on the performance testing on the CNCF cluster. So many things happening, so many other things. I don't know if you know this, but there's the last 2 weeks we've had over 10 people in the community call. There's just more and more interest happening.
Yeah, I followed a few threads of discussion on the Meshery channel, and it was a lot of information, so I just kind of focused on the internship for the while.
No, I get it. You got to do it, man. You've got to prioritize that.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, anything for Girish or I while you have us?
Not at the moment. Yeah, I'll after my internship, I'll be working on trying to figure out what these tool chain are. The tool chains that Christina mentioned are. I exactly like try to deploy them and kind of uh, finalize my thesis direction per se, like how to leverage these tool chains, what's a novel idea, because in part with Meshery, I do need to have academic publications as well for my graduation. So I do need to kind of figure out what kind of novel ideas I can do, and if those like I'm trying to align it with Meshery goals so that we can the both the project and the research can go hand in hand, and I can have some good results which can be incorporated into Meshery, and with the publication, we'll have a new version of Meshery re-released and things like that.
Well, that's fantastic. I totally agree about finding the alignment. That's actually in part like why Girish and I are focused on Meshery, because we tried to find alignment with things at SolarWinds, and just after a while, it's obvious that in some areas we can't, and it was really unfortunate because it's when you're able to dovetail efforts like that, you get a lot more out of it. Let's think, as you think toward the, I guess let me ask you this. As you think toward your academic paper, we had spoken much earlier on about various avenues for various metrics of success. Some of those being getting you up on stage at a industry conference. Your picture has been shown a number of times, but folks don't know you per se or of your forthcoming research. That's something that I'd still like to do, and there are plenty of opportunities to do that. And then also, I think vice versa. I don't know how we talked about. I don't know the potential assistance in the authoring of some of that research. Is that something that makes sense, or is that something relegated to that should be relegated to
So like how I envision it definitely can be done in collaboration, but at the moment, like the current work going on in Meshery has been more development focused. Like you're trying to build the platform up and trying to incorporate a lot of the meshes in, have the interface smooth and everything. So in those direction, all of that is a very good to get into and speak up on podiums like DockerCon and KubeCon. And when you have a nice smooth running demo, it attracts a lot of attention, and that's a very plus point to it. But on academic front, there needs to be real novel ideas and points of impact onto the community, on the research community, which as you could, I don't know, like with Christina, I don't know if you had the feeling like a lot of the underlying frameworks was what her interests aligned with.
Right.
So
Makes total sense.
with that in focus, if we come up with something, then definitely Meshery would be a co-author. Like we have on the academic papers, we have authors and the institutions they belong to, and their Meshery would definitely be a part of it. But I'm not sure like at what stage we are in with research.
Yeah, no, and in part I was asking to understanding that I was asking in part to as to whether or not we should be giving of the time that we're giving toward novelties with respect to enterprise class use cases that Meshery might have. I didn't know how much time we might want to give toward novelties in terms of research, if there might be collaboration there. It sounds like there might be, and that might be worth ideating with you on some of what those novel areas of research are. And yeah, I totally get hey, Meshery itself and all of its focus is excellent plumbing for like performing for facilitating the actual research to be done, and so
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I was gonna say next, that at the moment I think I need to figure out a decent research goal given the infrastructure that we have as Meshery. So when I am nearing that goal, then definitely I'll be collaborating with you guys, like you guys in the sense the whole community, with installing a particular app, installing a particular tool into the Meshery, collecting data, and the more number of people we garner by then, the more data points and the more metrics that we'll be able to collect, and those are some of the key resources that I would need or we would need in future to even discover something that is worth exploring.
right.
Because at this point the novelty of service meshes is already out there, but what new can be done on the service meshes and what is a key impact point on the service meshes is something that we will only figure out once we have tons of data.
Yeah. Okay, very good. I'm gonna go.
Yeah, I have to go get back to work as well.
Well, Prateek, yeah, it's good to hear your voice, man. We'll talk. See you soon.
Yeah, see ya.
Okay, all right. Bye, Prateek.